I'm going to just share a little bit about my journey. Um, and then, and hold on, I'm trying to get rid of something annoying on my, there we go. Um, and then get into kind of more substantive um, conversation around what I do every day, as Corbin got it right broadly, although I got to look at what I have online these days, because $268 million of projects is way underestimating at this point. I think I'm actually kind of closing towards $1 billion of community scale renewables that I've directly facilitated in my career, both as a consultant and now as a lawyer. But like most lawyers and politicians, as you'll see, I started my life, I have a Bachelor of Fine Arts in ceramics, and I made my living as a potter. Um, and so these are some pots from about 20 years ago in a case that I made. It's actually a pretty terrible picture, but you could see I made kind of useful utilitarian pots. I wanted them to be used every day and make the world a better place through handcrafted objects, but also be a little bit fancy and playful at the same time. So I've recently gotten back in the studio, and so these are some covered jars, kind of big enough for 3 or 4 handfuls of M&Ms. Peanut M&Ms tends to be my judge of how much you can fit in a jar. Um, uh, and then I really love cooking, and so I made some oil cruets and ewers, kind of just to play around and have fun. But I also, I made my living in my 20s doing so. And one of my mentors had actually built her own home, moving an old log cabin, actually 3 of them by hand, and digging the foundation herself, and had built this beautiful life, beautiful home. I was going to grab a slide. Maybe if we have time, I could show you what her house looks like now. But when I moved up to this rural area just north of Minneapolis, St. Paul, about an hour's drive away, she had just gotten notice from Xcel Energy, well then Northern States Power, that they were going to condemn her property as part of a 31-mile long transmission line to go 230,000 volt line to go across Minnesota, across the St. Croix, the federally protected St. Croix River, through this very narrow unprotected crossing, and then about another 15 miles in Wisconsin, and all to export power from Manitoba Hydroelectric Power through our territory in Minnesota and Wisconsin to Chicago, and then for further export east. And this was before Enron and the push to deregulation, but right on the cusp of it. So that really got my ire up. And long story short, I became a community organizer while also being a potter. And we organized this really huge coalition of 1,600 farmers, business owners, hardcore environmentalists, and in this really rural, mostly lily white community where everyone told us people never win these fights. It was kind of us against the man. And I had this experience where we just organized the heck out of people out of their self-interest. And we were the first citizens group in the history of electrical regulation to win one of these power line fights, because we proved it was the wrong electrical solution. So I was like, all right, let's go. I was all fired up on the social stuff, but kind of tired and lonely of being stuck in my studio. So long story short, I went to architecture school thinking it'd be the right pathway for me and a more social application of making the world a better place in a slightly bigger scale. Well, 9/11 happened the first month of school. I deliberately left the Midwest, went to Albuquerque, New Mexico, which is itself a pretty interesting place. So the conversation around ethical architecture and political economies really blossomed in the wake of 9/11. And 2 years later, when my political hero and one of my mentors, Paul Wellstone, was tragically killed running for re-election to the Senate, I realized it was time for me to step up and run for office myself. So I came back home to this rural community, ran as a pretty progressive Democrat in a very conservative district. Really cared about energy conservation, energy efficiency at the time, a little bit about renewables, a lot about the environment broadly. And you know, the last Democrat before me got 38%. So it was like, I was a kid, but let's give it a shot. And I lost my first race, became it was 52-44. So if you got rid of the third party, it was 54-46. Nearly got it done. And the next time in 2006, I won by 204 votes out of 20,000 votes. And we did it with 420 volunteers in a grassroots campaign. It was kind of the same kind of coalition building, grassroots organizing. It was a blast, to be honest. But I got elected at a time when we had a big progressive majority in the House and in the and in the Minnesota Senate. George Bush was still president, and Tim Pawlenty had just gotten reelected as governor. So he had decided, as part of his push for national office, that he was going to make energy and climate change a signature part of his platform. So imagine that, like a Republican running for national office and saying that I need climate change to be the the appealing issue. Well, I just thought that's kind of how it worked. You know, I was pretty naive at the time, but I got to apply what I had studied and learned for so long to be the chief author of the cornerstone of the Next Generation Energy Act, which was the strongest climate and energy conservation and combined with renewables, the strongest bill of its kind. And so that was kind of a blast. And I'd go around the country and talk about the bill and our work in Minnesota, but everyone else was getting economic development and we weren't. So I really, from that point forward, became really focused on green jobs. I hate the term, but I was the chair of the state's Green Jobs Task Force because a job is a job. And frankly, as we all know now, that there are more jobs in solar than, I think it's like 6 times more than coal. You guys probably know this at this point. It's something like 3.5 or 4 times more jobs in solar than natural gas. But at the time, you know, we were still just setting the stage. So this is Lewis King, head of Summit Academy, OIC, which is one of the trade and job training organizations here in Minnesota that trains folks who have some nick on their record and puts them to work. And so they really were building an energy efficiency and weatherization cohort. This was, I think, 2008 or 9. And, you know, the same kind of organizing helped me get a lot of good work done at the legislature, which I was very lucky about. And as you can tell, at the time that I served, Minnesota was still, while we were increasingly a state of color. I mean, look at how few people of color are represented in these photos. I'm just really, really proud of how much things have changed, certainly on one side of the aisle, if not both. But it fit my skill set a lot. And I was kind of surprised when in 2009, I was asked by this guy, who some of you may know, to be the state legislative liaison to the climate and energy team at the White House. So I got to do crazy stuff for 2-3 years. And then my wife is a doctor and delivers babies down here in Minneapolis. And we decided that it was time to start our family. And sorry, I stole some slides from an for an interfaith power and light organization. Tikkun Olam is the Jewish value of making the world a better place. So my journey is really about increased scale of impact. Yeah, so we decided not to run for a third term in 2010 and moved down to Minneapolis. And I just started really focusing on how do we expand access in a more meaningful way? Like, what's my next time I actually got to say no to a job at the White House, which was a crazy experience. But I continued to get focused on, okay, access to capital and a little bit of consulting, but really access to well-structured capital is what's holding us up. It's what's really constraining then our ability to go from the 600 kilowatts of solar we had in the state of Minnesota when I authored the state's first solar incentive to now, of course, we have 1.2 gigawatts, I think, something like that. So we literally had 2,000 panels, and now we have like 4 billion panels installed in the state 15 years later. It's nuts. It's like totally a mind trip to me. So this is my dad, and a funny stop driving his car down to Florida for their winter adventure, and stopping somewhere in rural America. I can't remember what town this is in Kentucky, but I learned from my dad a great deal. He was a third generation Main Street retail store owner, and just really the bedrock values of kind of moral deployment of money. And it's been the heart and soul. This is actually one of our last outings together 2.5 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, before as I said, he died 2 years ago. And he just left me this really strong legacy of being a true and honest human, and that business and enterprise can be a force for good in the world. And particularly in thinking about expanding access and opportunity and the good blessings that my family has gotten. So I want to talk a little bit about a project that where I was assigned as a consultant to the White House Task Force on Baltimore after Freddie Gray was killed at the hands of police in 2014. And those of you who know that story and know the story of George Floyd here a mile from my house might resonate with you how shocking it was to see the same story happen in my own backyard. But as you know, Freddie Gray was a young black man, a boy, killed at the hands of police. And unfortunately, they were not convicted of murder, but what it really led to was a series of unrest and protests in the city that captured the attention of then the mayor, and this community process around One Baltimore, and this initiative to say, what can we do to mobilize our city resources, reinvest in our people, and create jobs? So the vision had been laid by the community, and I was assigned by the Secretary of Energy to put together the financing structure that could rely on private capital and private investment to meet the needs of a community. So 1,000 homeowners who had gotten weatherization services, who were income eligible, so qualified as low income, and who were homeowners of these row homes largely because they have been inherited from their ancestors, from their grandparents and great-grandparents. And I don't need to tell you guys about energy poverty, so I won't reiterate that. But we really built this blueprint in 2015 and 16 that allowed First Grid Alternatives to put up the first pilot project. And here's one of the beneficiaries in the white shirt on the left side. And a little bit more about the project here. Let's see. So this is actually Secretary Moniz and the mayor, Congressman John Sarbanes, my dear friend Alice Kennedy here on the right, who's now the Commissioner of Housing and Community Development. And in the hard hat, you can't see them, but it's another member of Obama's cabinet. This is actually Congressman Sarbanes up on the roof, helping to install solar modules, which is amazing for a member of Congress to do so. But we built this platform that allowed us to build on the fact that the city of Baltimore had weatherized 10,000 units since 2009. 3,500 of them were owner occupied. And we were able to put together a structure so for no money down, a third party community investment group would own the systems, and then, you know, you would sell the power back at 20%. This probably feels like such old hat, right? Like boring structures we all know about. Well, this was one of the very first community initiatives, and being able to structure it so that it was totally de-risked, and we got bank money to come in to recognize exactly how we could do it, and to recognize the security and the that these weren't low risk or high risk investments, so that we actually had de-risked the investment. And one quick story. So I've spent a long time, and here's the mayor and the head of the Energy Jobs Council for the Department of Energy, the Maryland Clean Energy Center. Oh gosh, will someone from Maryland remind me of this, the late congressman's name? It's killing me. Who's here with Congressman Sarbanes in the blue shirt? I can't believe I can't remember his name. So, but, and then this is one of the other beneficiaries, and of course, Ms. Alice Kennedy. So Alice was taking me around the city with the Urban League and other potential community investors, kind of successful. If you know Baltimore, Baltimore is kind of 1/3 white, 1/3 working class, poor Black, and 1/3 professional Black. And the successful professional Black community was really deeply engaged and seeking avenues to invest and participate. And I remember that when I went to meet with one of them and laid out this opportunity to be an investor and get an 8 to 10% return, he jumped over the table to give me a hug in the middle of the meeting. And he said, "It's about damn time that the world sees my people and the city of Baltimore as a case for investment, not a charity case." And I just wanted to share that with you all, because this is really why I reactivated my law license, and what I've been doing for the last 15 years is being legal counsel to groups like People's Solar Energy Fund, Cooperative Energy Futures, the Community Lighthouse Project at Together New Orleans is put together, obviously in Baltimore and Philly, Capital Good Fund, which was the featured recipient of the Solar for All announcement of the greenhouse gas reduction funds last month. Oh, Elijah Cummings, there we go. It's right there on my slide. Congressman Cummings, a blessed memory. So, you know, this project has really, sadly, the blueprint that David Foster, the head of the Secretary of Energy's Jobs Council, had us put together, ended up never getting published because of the Trump election and tying up their general counsel's office, that they wouldn't approve the blueprint, couldn't approve the blueprint in time to get it out and published. But it really helped lay the groundwork for a lot of the progress we're seeing across the board. And there's a reason why the senator from Maryland was the sponsor of the Solar for All provision in the Inflation Reduction Act. So, you know, personally, I try to lead by example as well. This is the solar going on our roof 6 years ago. I have a cute picture of our kids then, but I can't find it. So sorry that you don't get to see our kids, who are now 13 years old almost. And now as a lawyer, there we go. One of the things that I have been doing before the Inflation Reduction Act is spending my time being an advisor, in the same way I described in the Baltimore work, to both potential investors who can take advantage of their unique position, but try to prioritize community investment over you know, any other investments that might be put in front of them. And this is a really cool partnership. The woman in the middle, Julia Nurbin, is the executive director of Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light. The Pastor Aquila on the left is the pastor at Liberty Community Church in North Minneapolis. And you may not know that, or maybe you do because of George Floyd and the light that's been shined on Minnesota especially, that we are one of the most segregated states by race and one of the most segregated cities by race in the United States. In fact, we are have the worst racial equity gap by home ownership, one of the worst on personal wealth, on household wealth, one of the worst on college education. And yet, I think that people think of the state of Minnesota as being a kind of beacon of progressive ideas and progressive policy, progressive economics. Well, the Liberty Community Church is on the north side of Minneapolis, blocks away from the Emmanuel Cone Jewish Center or Center for Jewish Life, where my grandfather and my grandmother met as social workers in the late 30s. And too many of the Jewish community went as part of white flight to the suburbs. My family on my mom's side has always stayed in the city of Minneapolis. And ironically, my wife's as well. And, so figuring out ways to prioritize as a tax credit lawyer working in the solar space, to prioritize community development over, large or gigawatt size, 1,000-acre, 15,000-acre solar projects has been really fun and fascinating for me to build resilience hubs like there at Liberty Church. And Umber Nakvi is the software entrepreneur here focused on that's the feature of the headline. Umber had this really unique position of having sold the company that basically made his family comfortable for the rest of their life. And he said, I want to do something different and something meaningful. And we walked through how to make him an eligible tax credit investor for solar. This was the first of 2 or 3 dozen projects that resulted out of the partnership. And now we're scaling up to do resilience hubs with solar and storage, which was one of them is in Baltimore. Several of them will be in Minnesota. The Community Lighthouse Project in New Orleans is similar. And so it's just a real pleasure and honor to be spending my days doing this work. I could go into more detail on it. But I think the one thing that I'll share about the Inflation Reduction Act that has really transformed, I'm going to go back to Umber's story. It has really transformed the solar industry. For years, I've been trying to say that we shouldn't rely on tax credits that just make wealthy people wealthier in order to advance the solar development and climate action, climate response, and especially community equity. Because it's sort of like having 2 fully loaded locomotives that are pulling on the same track in opposite directions, right? We're making people who are already wealthy wealthier while we're trying to do equity in the world. What's stronger? Well, we're barely getting some climate action, and maybe we're dealing with energy poverty, but we're at a macro level, we're sort of stuck in the middle. One of the things to go full circle, I'll go way back to the photo. One of the things that I worked on for years at the White House and since was to change something called the passive income limitation, Section 469 of the tax code. I am not going to bore you with it. But largely, it has said before the Inflation Reduction Act, if you cannot take the tax credit, then the only way to monetize that 30 or 40%, or in this case up to 70% now, has been to get an outside investor to invest in your project and give them anywhere from 8 to 20% returns every year, put them in the preferred position as a partner, and they're actually what's called a limited partner, meaning they are not engaged in the business of the work, right? They're just taking the money. And they're the first, they get a preferred return, it's literally what it's called, payment in the stack of revenue. Well, that's not what we're about. So for years, I've been pushing to say, let's do something to make that tax credit more accessible or refundable. So Section 6417 of the tax code was implemented by in the Inflation Reduction Act, and it means that tax exempt entities like nonprofit organizations or cities or counties or tribes can get a direct payment to the tax credit. And it has really transformed the industry to the point where more and more and more of my clients are taking advantage of organizations like People's Solar Energy Fund or community development organizations. So they get 100% of the return of the tax credit, can be in charge of their own destiny, and immediately cut the cost of a project by 30% or more if you're getting a low income adder. So that's what I spend all of my days doing now, is structuring Resilience Hub financing projects, or projects like the Liberty Community Church. We wouldn't need, now we don't need Umber. Sorry, buddy. See ya. Because now the church could own this project and get 100% of that benefit of the solar. And we now have financing products from greenhouse gas reduction funds and